November 21st, 1943, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. 20 million Americans are tuning their radios to Drew Pearson's broadcast. In 30 minutes, they'll hear something that will shake the nation, a story about their greatest general, a hospital tent, and a loaded gun. Mothers will demand his execution. Congress will call for court-martial. The press will turn him into a villain overnight. But 3 months earlier, only 12 people knew what happened. 12 witnesses in a tent in Sicily. This is their story. August 10th, 1943. A field hospital tent in Sicily. The air thick with the smell of iodine and blood. General George S. Patton stood over a trembling soldier. His hand was already raised. This was the second time in 7 days he'd done this. The soldier had no visible wounds, no blood, no bandages, just shaking hands and hollow eyes and a fever of 102 degrees. Patton's face twisted with rage. He started screaming, called the man a coward, a disgrace. Then Patton did something witnesses would never forget, something that would end up in official reports. In sworn testimony, in newspapers across America, his hand moved to his hip, to the ivory-handled Colt .45 he always carried. A nurse stepped between them, 5'3", facing down a 6-foot general with a loaded weapon. The tent went silent. Medical staff froze. Wounded men stopped breathing. Outside, artillery rumbled in the distance. Inside, nobody moved. For 5 seconds, the only sound was the soldier's labored breathing. Then Patton's hand came up, not to holster the weapon. The slap echoed through the tent. But that wasn't the worst part. What came next would be called assault with a deadly weapon. 30 seconds earlier, George Patton had been the hero who took Messina. 30 seconds later, his career was over. This is the story of what happened in between, and why the man who feared weakness most couldn't see it in himself. July 10th, 1943. The amphibious assault began at 2:45 in the morning. Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily. George Patton commanded the U.S. 7th Army, 80,000 men, 7 divisions, hundreds of ships. But back in Berlin, German intelligence officers were keeping files on every Allied general, especially Patton, the one they feared most. His mission was simple: land on the southern coast, secure the beachhead, push inland. But Patton had a different plan. He was going to race Bernard Montgomery to Messina. The British general had more men, more equipment, more support from Eisenhower. Patton saw it as a race. Montgomery saw it as a campaign. Both men wanted the same thing: victory. But Patton wanted it first. The first week went well. American forces pushed inland faster than expected. Casualties were lighter than feared. Patton drove from unit to unit, screaming the same order: keep moving. Speed kills the enemy. But by the second week, something changed. The casualties started mounting. Not from combat, from something else. Combat exhaustion. That's what the medical officers called it. Psychological trauma. What the last war had called shell shock. Soldiers breaking down under the weight of war. Men who'd seen too much, done too much, endured too much. Their bodies were intact. Their minds were breaking under the strain. By late July, combat exhaustion cases were flooding the field hospitals, dozens per day, then hundreds. Patton visited the hospitals regularly. He walked through the tents. He spoke to the wounded. He pinned medals on men who'd lost limbs. But the combat exhaustion cases bothered him. Each hospital visit, Patton's patients grew thinner, because Patton had built his entire life around one principle. Fear was weakness. Weakness was death. And a soldier who gave in to fear was a coward. He'd spent 40 years constructing a mask of fearlessness. The profanity, the ivory-handled pistols, the swagger, all of it designed to hide the terrified boy who couldn't read, the cadet who failed his first year, the man who wrote letters calling himself stupid. Patton had conquered his own fear by burying it, by never acknowledging it, by never giving it space to breathe. And now he was walking through hospitals full of men who'd done the opposite. Men who'd let fear win. On August 3rd, 1943, Patton visited the 15th Evacuation Hospital near Nicosia. It was a routine visit. He'd done dozens of them. He walked through the rows of wounded men. Some had lost legs, some had burns across their bodies, some were dying. Flies buzzed around the surgical tables. The heat was unbearable even in the shade of the tents. Patton stopped at each bed. He spoke quietly. He offered encouragement. Then he reached the receiving tent. A soldier was sitting on a wooden box. No bandages, no wounds, just sitting there. Patton stopped. He asked the man what was wrong. The soldier said his nerves were shot. He couldn't take it anymore. Patton's face changed. He asked the soldier where he was hurt. The man repeated himself. His nerves. He couldn't stand the shelling. That's when Patton exploded. He called the soldier a coward. A yellow son of a bitch. He screamed that men were dying, and this man was sitting in a hospital for nothing. Then he slapped him, an open hand across the face, hard enough that the soldier's helmet liner fell off and clattered on the dirt floor. The soldier's name was Private Charles H. Cool. He was 21 years old. He'd been serving with the 26th Infantry Regiment, Company L. What Patton didn't know was that Cool had chronic dysentery. He had malaria. He'd been hospitalized twice before for physical illness. His body was breaking down. His mind was following. Patton only saw a man with no visible wounds taking up space in a hospital. Medical officers witnessed the entire incident. They filed reports immediately. Lieutenant Colonel Perrin H. Long wrote a detailed account. Long was a Johns Hopkins Medical School graduate. He'd been treating psychological casualties for months. Long knew what he was risking. Reporting a superior officer could end his career. But he was a doctor. He'd taken an oath. The report reached General Omar Bradley within days. Bradley was Patton's peer. Another corps commander in Sicily. Bradley read it. He filed it away. He said nothing, because the campaign was still ongoing. Patton was winning. The race to Messina was heating up. Nobody stops a winning general. Reports were already moving up the chain of command, and every hour Patton kept winning made the decision harder. Patton never mentioned the incident. He wrote in his diary that evening, a brief note. He'd encountered a coward. He'd given him what he deserved. Then he moved on. Patton had just gotten away with assault. But the clock was ticking. In 7 days, he'd do something worse. August 10th arrived. Patton visited another hospital, the 93rd Evacuation Hospital near San Stefano. Around 1 in the afternoon, the August sun beating down on the canvas tents. He walked through the wards, same routine. Stop at each bed, speak to the wounded, offer encouragement. Then he entered another receiving tent. Another soldier, sitting. No visible wounds. His name was Private Paul G. Bennett, 21 years old. He'd been serving in the Army for several years. His unit had taken 50% casualties in recent fighting. Bennett was shaking, trembling. He'd been begging his officers for weeks to send him back to combat. He felt guilty for being evacuated, but the medical staff had kept him back because Bennett had a 102-degree fever. He had malaria. Patton walked up to him. He asked what was wrong. Bennett said it was his nerves. He couldn't stand the shelling anymore. Patton had heard this before, 1 week ago, in another hospital, from another soldier, and this time, something in Patton broke completely. He started screaming. He called Bennett a coward. He said he ought to be lined up against a wall and shot. Then Patton reached for his hip. Private Charles Cool didn't want to be in Sicily. He wanted to be home, in South Bend, Indiana, with his family. But it was 1943, and when your country called, you went. The heat alone was unbearable, 110 degrees in the shade, except there was no shade. The fighting was constant, German positions on every hill, artillery fire from positions you couldn't see, and the diseases, malaria, dysentery, infections that wouldn't heal. Cool got sick 3 times in 3 weeks, each time worse than the last. By early August, his body was giving out. So was his mind. Every time an artillery shell landed nearby, he flinched. Every explosion made his hands shake. At night, he couldn't sleep. During the day, he couldn't focus. He'd seen men die, lots of men he knew, men he'd trained with. One of them had been standing right next to him when the shell hit. Cool had pieces of the man's uniform on his jacket. The medical officers recognized the symptoms: combat, exhaustion. The trauma was overwhelming him. It was a real diagnosis. The Army had treatment protocols: rest, separation from combat, gradual recovery. On August 3rd, Cool was evacuated to the 15th Evacuation Hospital. He sat on a wooden box in the receiving tent, waiting to be examined. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then General Patton walked in. Cool didn't know who he was at first, just another officer making rounds. Patton stopped in front of him, asked what was wrong. Cool told the truth. His nerves were shot. He couldn't take the shelling anymore. He expected sympathy, or at least understanding. Instead, Patton's face twisted with rage. The general screamed at him, called him a coward, a yellow son of a bitch. Then Patton hit him, an open hand across the face, hard enough that Cool's helmet liner fell off. Cool just sat there, stunned. He didn't fight back. He didn't say anything. Patton kept screaming. Then he grabbed Cool by the collar and dragged him toward the tent entrance. He told the medical staff to get this coward out of here. Don't admit him. Send him back to the front. Then Patton left. Cool sat back down. His face was red. His hands were still shaking. The medical officers examined him anyway. They found the malaria, the dysentery, the dehydration. They admitted him, they treated him, and they filed reports about what had just happened. Cool didn't know about the reports. He just knew that a general had called him a coward for being sick. Would anyone believe him? Would anyone care? He recovered, slowly. They sent him back to his unit 2 weeks later. He fought for the rest of the war. He survived. He went home to Indiana. He never forgot what happened in that tent, but he also never spoke about it publicly. Not for decades. Whether that was forgiveness or shame, nobody knows. Because Charles Cool understood something that Patton didn't. Being afraid didn't make you a coward. It made you human. But that was only the first incident. Private Paul Bennett had a different story. And what happened to him was worse. Bennett had been serving in the Army for several years. He'd seen combat in North Africa before Sicily. He was dedicated, reliable, the kind of man officers could count on. But Sicily was different. Bennett's unit took brutal casualties. More than half his company was dead or wounded. The fighting was house to house, street to street. Every day, someone he knew died. Bennett kept going. He didn't complain. He did his job. But something was building inside him. Pressure, fear, guilt. Guilt for surviving when others didn't. Guilt for feeling afraid. Guilt for wanting it to stop. By early August, Bennett was begging his officers to keep him in combat. He felt like he was abandoning his unit by being evacuated, but the medics wouldn't let him fight. Because Bennett had malaria, his fever was 102 degrees. They sent him to the 93rd Evacuation Hospital on August 10th. Bennett sat in the receiving tent. His whole body was shaking. Not just from the fever, from everything. Then General Patton walked in. Bennett recognized him immediately. Everyone knew Patton, the general who'd taken Messina, the hero of Sicily. Patton stopped in front of him, asked what was wrong. Bennett told him. His nerves. He couldn't stand the shelling. He expected Patton to understand. A general who'd seen combat, who'd been wounded in the last war. Instead, Patton exploded, worse than with Cool. Much worse. Patton screamed that there was no such thing as shell shock, that Bennett was a disgrace, that he should be shot. Then Patton drew his pistol, an ivory-handled Colt .45, Patton's trademark weapon. He held it inches from Bennett's head. The tent froze. Every person stopped moving, stopped breathing. This wasn't discipline anymore. This was something else entirely. A nurse named Ruth Griswold stepped between them. She was 5'3". Patton was 6 feet tall, holding a loaded pistol. She didn't say a word. She just stood there. The tent went completely silent. Every doctor, every nurse, every wounded soldier, all watching. Would Patton pull the trigger? And Patton blinked first. He didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he brought his other hand around. He slapped Bennett across the face with his open hand. Then he pistol whipped him. The gun's barrel struck Bennett's temple. Bennett fell sideways. Blood ran down his face. Patton wasn't finished. He screamed that Bennett needed to get back to the front, that he'd shoot him himself if he didn't. Then he turned and walked out. The tent remained silent for several seconds. Then the medical staff rushed to Bennett. They examined the wound. They checked for concussion, and they filed reports. detailed reports, with multiple witnesses, with one critical detail that changed everything: a drawn weapon pointed at a soldier's head, because what they'd just witnessed wasn't discipline. It was assault with a deadly weapon. 2 soldiers, 2 incidents, 7 days apart. Both men sick. Both men diagnosed with real medical conditions. Both men doing their best to serve. And both assaulted by the same general who couldn't see past his own fear. The reports were moving up the chain of command. Faster now, more urgent, more witnesses. But nobody was stopping Patton yet. Because on August 17th, 7 days after he pistol-whipped Private Bennett, George Patton would achieve his greatest triumph. He would take Messina. He would beat Montgomery. He would become a hero. And that's exactly when the reports would reach Eisenhower's desk. August 17th, 1943. Patton's forces entered Messina at 10 in the morning. He'd won the race, beat Montgomery to the city, taken it before the British even got close. Photographers captured the moment. Patton standing in his jeep, smiling, victorious. The newspapers called him a genius, a warrior, America's greatest general. Eisenhower sent congratulations. Marshall praised the achievement. The whole country celebrated. But 2 days earlier, on August 15th, something else had happened. The medical reports reached Eisenhower's desk. Not just one report, multiple reports. From doctors, from nurses, from officers who'd witnessed both incidents. They described what Patton had done in clinical detail. The slapping, the verbal abuse, the drawn pistol. They included Private Bennett's medical chart, the documented fever, the malaria diagnosis. They included witness statements, a dozen people who'd seen Patton pull his weapon. Eisenhower read every page. Medical testimony, witness statements, the documented illnesses. Then he made his choice. He put the reports in his desk drawer, not because they weren't true, because Patton had just won. The Sicily campaign was ending in victory. And Eisenhower needed Patton for what came next, the invasion of France. So Eisenhower made a decision. He would handle this privately. No court-martial, no public disclosure, just a stern letter. On August 19th, Eisenhower wrote to Patton. The letter was direct. Eisenhower acknowledged that battlefield commanders needed to be tough, that discipline was necessary, but brutality was not. Abuse of sick soldiers was not. Uncontrollable temper was not. Eisenhower told Patton he'd seriously considered relieving him of command, that the incidents were inexcusable. Then he gave Patton an order. Apologize to both soldiers, apologize to the medical staff who witnessed it, apologize to every division under your command. Do this, or you're finished. Patton read the letter in his headquarters. Alone, he was furious. He wrote in his diary that night. He insisted his motives were correct, that cowardice couldn't be tolerated, that he'd done nothing wrong. But he also knew he had no choice. So Patton apologized, first to Cool, then to Bennett. Private meetings, brief statements, both soldiers accepted. They didn't want the general's career ruined over them. Then Patton had to face the divisions. Every unit he commanded, one by one. He stood before thousands of soldiers, read a prepared statement, said his method was wrong, that he regretted his actions. Some units accepted it quietly. Some applauded, some booed. A few soldiers walked out. Patton endured it all. The humiliation, the shame, the public acknowledgement of failure. But he thought it was over. He was wrong. Because the medical officers had also told journalists, 3 reporters knew the full story by late August. They had the details, the dates, the names, but they sat on it. Military censorship was still in effect. Publishing it could harm the war effort, so they waited. September passed. October passed. The story stayed buried. Patton continued planning. Eisenhower gave him command of the Third Army. The invasion of France was coming. Patton would lead one of the largest forces America had ever assembled. Everything seemed fine. Then we're back to where we started, November 21st, 1943, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Drew Pearson went on national radio. Pearson was one of America's most famous journalists. His radio show reached millions. His columns appeared in hundreds of newspapers. And on November 21st, he told America what Patton had done. He described both slappings in detail. He named the soldiers. He revealed the pistol. He explained that Eisenhower had covered it up for months. The reaction was immediate and explosive. By the next morning, newspaper offices were flooded with letters, angry letters, demanding Patton's dismissal. Congress received thousands of telegrams, mothers of soldiers, veterans groups, religious organizations, all saying the same thing: Patton must go. Within a week, over 1.5 million Americans had written demanding Patton be court-martialed. The press turned on him. Editorial boards called for his removal. Political cartoons showed him bullying wounded soldiers. Patton's image collapsed overnight. The hero of Messina became the general who beat 6 soldiers. Eisenhower had a decision to make, the same decision he'd postponed in August. Now he couldn't postpone it anymore. On his desk sat a personnel order. It would relieve Patton of command, effective immediately. One signature. That's all it took. Military justice, said court-martial. Military necessity, said keep him. And sitting in a staff room in Berlin, German intelligence officers were watching. They'd heard about the incidents. They'd read the American newspapers, and they were trying to figure out what it meant. Was Patton truly disgraced, or was this American misdirection? Because if Patton was sidelined, that changed German defensive planning entirely. Patton was the one Allied general Germany feared most, the one they knew could break through anywhere, the one they had to stop. So German planners waited, watching, trying to understand. Was Patton finished, or was he just getting started? Eisenhower made his choice. Patton stayed. No court-martial, no dismissal, no formal punishment beyond the forced apologies he'd already given. Eisenhower's reasoning was simple. Germany feared Patton more than any other Allied general. Removing him would be a gift to the enemy, but Patton paid a price anyway. He was sidelined. While other generals planned the D-Day invasion, Patton waited in England. No command, no role, just waiting. The public humiliation continued for months. Every newspaper reminded America what he'd done. Every editorial questioned his judgment. Patton wrote letters to his wife. He called it the darkest period of his life, worse than any combat, worse than any wound. Because the mask had slipped, the fearless general had revealed what was underneath, a man terrified of weakness. A man who couldn't tolerate in others what he'd spent his whole life hiding in himself. The boy who couldn't read had become the general who couldn't see invisible wounds. But while Patton sat in disgrace, the Germans were still watching. And they made a calculation. They still feared him, and they were right to. Patton won the war that followed. He led the Third Army across France, broke through the German lines faster than anyone thought possible, saved Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge. But the moment history remembers isn't the victory. It's the moment he raised his hand against his own soldier. In the next episode, we see how disgrace became deception. How Patton commanded an army that didn't exist. How he fooled Hitler himself with inflatable tanks and phantom divisions. How the general nobody trusted became the weapon that won D-Day. This is War Maestro Chronicles. Drop a comment. If you were Eisenhower, what would you do? Court-martial your best general or hide assault with a deadly weapon? Your answer might reveal more about you than you think. Subscribe. The next episode drops soon.